What makes our arm tingle? Ah, have you ever fallen asleep on your arm? That's a really good question. We'll save it for the end. Okay, let's move on to the next one, which is also really interesting. Iber, what's the secret behind thermal mugs being so effective with drinks? This question deserves a somewhat radical answer. Secret of these mugs is that there's absolutely nothing inside. Two walls, basically a cup inside and a cup outside. And between the two cups, we have a vacuum, we have emptiness. Got it? But how does that help keep the drink from warming up? Heat always moves from the hotter object to the colder one. And there are three ways this transfer can happen. The first is conduction, when one thing touches another. For example, when you touch your hand to a hot pan, the molecules on the hotter side start agitating the molecules on the cooler side. That won't happen in this cup because there's nothing between the outer wall and the inner wall. The second way is convection, which happens when you have a fluid, a gas or a liquid between the two objects. Then the hot part rises, the cold part sinks, and this circulation causes heat to transfer from one to the other. Here, we don't have air or anything else, so convection can't happen either. The third way is radiation. The hot object emits infrared or even visible light, like the sun, for example. The sun's heat reaches us through radiation. That could theoretically happen here too. But the inside of the mug is aluminum coated. It reflects light and reflects radiation, so very little actually occurs. To sum up, of the three ways heat can be conducted, only one works here, and even then, just barely. That's the big secret behind those mugs that keep drinks cold. Well, actually, they don't cool the drink, right? They just prevent heat from reaching the drink. How do head lice live on our heads? Do they only drink blood? On our heads. That's up to you. I haven't had lice in about 30 years, okay? But yes, the louse is a kind of vampire that sucks our blood. Just to give you an idea, a single louse can suck roughly half its body weight in blood. If I were a louse, that would mean that when I suck blood from someone's head, I could end up weighing 120 kilograms. While researching this topic, something that really surprised me was the way lice suck blood. Here's a description. The mouth parts of a blood-sucking louse consist of 3 piercing stylets, normally retracted inside a pouch in the head. When the louse feeds, the stylets extend through a rostrum on the front of its head. This rostrum has tiny hooks that anchor the louse to its host while it sucks. In short, the hooks hold the louse in place, and it stabs the stylet into you. Hey, Eber. Where does wind come from? I saw an explanation online, but I didn't fully understand it. Let's draw it, but there's also a really cool experiment. Imagine you have a warm area, about the size of a municipality, and a cold area nearby. In the warm region, the air starts to rise. You've seen this in several experiments here on Manual du Mundo. Hot air rises, which is why hot air balloons go up, for example, right? So we'll have a flow of hot air rising right here. And the question is, if that air is rising, what's filling the space it left behind? You can't have a vacuum down here, right? Exactly, you can't. So the surrounding air wants to move into that space. So a flow begins. Cold air moves in to take the place of the rising warm air. And as you might have noticed, this flow isn't vertical like the rising one, it's horizontal. Guess what we call that? Wind. So that's how wind forms, by moving in to replace air that has left a spot. Of course, this cycle closes. The air up here will eventually reach a cooler region, sit down, and fill the space left by other air that moved away. So, ultimately, we have a complex movement of multiple air masses happening throughout the atmosphere. But the core idea is this. We've already done 2 experiments on Manual du Mundo to demonstrate it, experiments you can try at school. The first involves simulating this inside an aquarium, placing something hot on one side and something cold on the other. Then, using colored water to show this movement, which in this case happens in the water instead of air. The other option is to do this inside a plastic soda bottle, using a candle here. Then you'll notice smoke starts entering from one side and exiting from the other, entering from one side and exiting from the other. Is it true that baldness is inherited from your mother's side of the family? This photo I'm showing you is of my grandparents holding me. It was taken in 1981, and my grandfather, as you can see, he already had somewhat thinning hair. He was going bald. Noticeable receding hairline, very similar to what's been happening to me. So looking at this photo, I might quickly assume, yes, it comes from my mom's side, but it's not that simple. Baldness is caused by many genes, right? It's not a straightforward thing. A large part does come from your mother, so you could say most of it comes from her. But there's also a portion that comes from your father. You can't prove the genetics of baldness with just one photo. Why does a living body sink, but a dead one floats? That question is kind of grim, but I had the same curiosity when I was a kid too. Why? When any mammal dies, does it float? But at the moment of death, it sinks. That doesn't make sense, does it? The truth is, our body has almost the same density as water. It floats, but just barely. If you stay completely still in the water, with your whole body submerged except for your mouth sticking out, you'll float perfectly. The problem is, if you completely empty your lungs, exhale all the air, you'll sink. And if at that moment you're drowning and swallow some water, that's it. Your body becomes denser than water and sinks. That's what happens in drownings. Let's say that's exactly what occurred. Someone died by drowning. They sank to the bottom of the sea or river. Over time, the bacteria inside the body start breaking it down, and they release certain gases, like methane, carbon dioxide, and hydrogen sulfide. These gases form because the bacteria are consuming cells and molecules that were once solid or liquid, and now turn into gas. That gas gets trapped inside the body and acts like a kind of flotation device. At that point, the body rises and starts to float. That's why in most drowning cases, a person sinks. And if they died underwater, the body usually resurfaces later. What happens if Pinocchio says, "My nose will grow now"? Infinite energy, check this out. I swear I tried to draw a nice-looking Pinocchio, but honestly, I failed. So at this moment, he says, "My nose will grow now." That's a lie, because his nose wasn't going to grow. But if he's lying, his nose grows. The problem is, once his nose grows, that statement becomes true, so his nose returns to its original size. It shrinks. But if his nose shrinks, then it didn't grow, and if it didn't grow, the statement becomes false again. So his nose grows because it was a lie, but as it grows, the statement becomes true again. Pinocchio's nose starts wildly growing and shrinking. If you're into engineering, you've probably already thought, hey, let's turn Pinocchio's nose into a piston rod. So we attach the tip of Pinocchio's nose to a wheel, and that wheel is connected to a generator. That means the nose keeps growing and shrinking, over and over, just like a piston rod in an engine. Like that V8 electromagnetic motor we built. And as the wheel spins, connected to the generator, we'd finally have our infinite energy generator. A second option would be to tie a piece of buttered toast to a cat's back, with the butter side up. Then you drop the cat. Since cats always land on their feet, but buttered toast always lands butter side down. Neither would ever land, they just keep spinning. Attach that to a generator shaft and boom, you'd also have infinite energy. The problem with this second idea is that you waste food and mistreat animals. With Pinocchio, though, he's just a simple wooden puppet, so it's no problem. You could build more Pinocchios and all good. My dad always made me believe you can have a busy life and sleep very little. Look, it's possible. But will it be a good life? I think that's a different story altogether. To be totally honest with you, I have an extremely busy life here at Manuel do Mundo. I don't know. I sometimes work 12 hours a day. It's pretty common. At least one day every week. I work about 12 hours, then come home. I have 2 young daughters. Weekends are always super hectic. I travel constantly. And one of the biggest secrets that helps me manage it all is sleeping well. Our bodies need rest. Some people need less sleep, others a bit more. But having a busy life and sleeping too little, or less than what you feel is enough, I doubt that will lead to good long-term results. It might mean you'll feel more exhausted when you're older, or you'll age much faster, or that age-related conditions, like back pain, I don't know, might show up earlier than they should. So, if you'll allow me to offer some advice, try to sleep a bit more. If you're short on time, try to grab this little creature here and set it aside, because it's the thing that wastes the most time pointlessly in our lives today. All right, let's give it one more shot, trying again to get a question in here. Now you got it. Why does a balloon make so much noise when it pops? To me, that answer seemed obvious. When you inflate a balloon, a lot of air builds up inside. It's under pressure, right? You compress the air so it can stretch the rubber. When it pops, all that air rushes out at once and creates a sound wave, right? It vibrates the air and makes our eardrums move. But when I went to research it, I discovered that wasn't exactly right. That is one cause of the noise, but not the main one. The main cause is that when the balloon pops, the rubber, right at the moment it's snapping back, opening up, vibrates intensely. And it's this rubber vibration that creates most of the popping sound. And a third thing that contributes to the noise, one I hadn't even considered, is that when the rubber snaps open and slaps against itself, it also makes sound rubber hitting rubber. There's a really cool video we recorded, must be about 12 years ago, showing this in slow motion. We filmed a balloon popping. First, we filled it with flour so we could see the flour scatter at the exact moment the balloon burst. Later, we managed to film one filled with water. Those images are amazing. Why is it called a metro? The lines are kilometers long, not meters. I've answered a nearly identical question before, but I'll give a better answer this time. The world's first metro was built in London in 1863. I actually rode that line when I visited London. It's a little metro that still runs today, quite tiny like this. That metro is fascinating because it's not exactly like the tunnels we have here in Sao Paulo, for example. They dug a trench right through the city and then covered it back up. And since trains back then were steam-powered, Maria Fumasa, they needed openings to let some of that smoke escape. So when you're on that metro, sometimes it's open to the sky, sometimes it's covered. It's very different from today's metros. That line was called the Metropolitan Railway, which means Metropolitan Railroad. A railway that runs within the big city. So you might assume the name Metro came for that, right? After all, Metropolitan Railway. But actually, that name never stuck in London. If you go there today and ask where the metro is, you'd need to ask for the underground or the tube. The term metro actually comes from French because in 1900, Paris launched its own metro with the same idea, but in French, it was called Chemin de Fer Metropolitain, Metropolitan Railway, which is the same as Metropolitan Railway or Metropolitan Railroad. And so, many countries that speak Romance languages, like Portuguese, when they built their metros about 70 years later, adopted the name Metro from the Paris Metro. That's how the name spread. But you know this is Manuel do Mundo. We always aim to go beyond the average. So I still find this answer incomplete. In your question, you mentioned meter as if metro had nothing to do with it, right? Could the word meter be connected to metropolis, where metropolitan comes from? Meter comes from Greek and means measuring instrument or a measure. So when the metric meter was created, by the way, we have a really cool video showing how the original meter was defined. That's why this ruler has that inscription on the back. They chose that Greek word to represent this unit of length. The word metropolis also comes from Greek, but from a different root, meter, at the start of metropolis means mother, and polis means city. So a metropolis is a mother city. It's a city larger than others, a reference point for surrounding cities. Now that's a Manuel do Mundo worthy answer. Why are distances between planets measured in light years instead of kilometers? Cool, right? It's kind of related to the previous question. Depending on the scale of what you're measuring, we use different units. If you're measuring a screw, for example, you'd usually use a caliper, and that measurement would be in millimeters. This tiny little unit, right? About the thickness of your fingernail. If I'm measuring a person's height, millimeters are way too small. I need something bigger, so we usually use centimeters, which are roughly the width of an entire fingernail, right? Looking at your nail from above. So for example, I'm 1 meter and 75 centimeters tall. But if I'm talking about the distance between two cities, we usually use kilometers. That's 1,000 meters. From here to P8, for example, the town I'm from, it's about 100 kilometers. When we start talking about distances between bodies in the solar system, kilometers become too small. For instance, from here to the moon is about 380,000 kilometers. From here to the sun, 150 million kilometers. You'd agree that's an unwieldy number, right? We need another unit, and actually, it's not the light year that we use here. There's a unit called the astronomical unit, That's the Earth to Sun distance, used to measure distances between planets within our solar system. We usually use that. It's about 150 million kilometers. So, for example, let me grab a quick reference here. Mars is about 1.5 astronomical units from the Sun, meaning Mars is roughly 50% farther from the Sun than Earth is. Saturn is about 9.5 astronomical units from the Sun. So phrasing it like this makes it easier to visualize than saying hundreds of millions or billions of kilometers within the solar system. This works fine. But when we talk about much larger distances, like between stars, astronomical units aren't enough. What do we do then? How do we handle that? Astronomers calculated the distance light travels in 1 year. And that gives us this enormous distance, 9.46 trillion kilometers, which is far more practical for measuring gigantic cosmic scales. Just to give you an idea of the nearest star to us, Proxima Centauri is about 4 light years away. That's why we use different units of measurement, depending on what we're measuring. Imagine measuring a screw in light years. It wouldn't make any sense. How long would it take us to travel 1 light year? With our current technology? Wow, what a coincidence. 2 questions on the same topic appearing so close together. Well, now you know what a light year is, right? So, what's the fastest thing humans have ever launched into space? It's the Voyager 1 probe. We've even made a whole video about it here. It's actually the farthest object humans have ever sent from Earth, and it's still out there traveling. It's moving at about 61,000 kilometers per hour, which sounds incredibly fast, but isn't really that fast in cosmic terms. Just to give you an idea, it would take about 6 hours to reach the moon, and roughly 18,000 years to travel 1 light year. That means humanity doesn't have the technology, not even close, to make interstellar travel possible yet, right? Reaching another star, just getting to Proxima Centauri, would take about 70,000 years. My name's Pedro. Hi, Pedro, and I have a question. Where do animals that hatch from eggs get their building material? Me and you. When we were in our mothers' wombs as fetuses, we got nutrients directly from our mothers, right? Nutrients arrived through the umbilical cord, a little tube coming from the placenta, right? Which is attached to the mother and runs to the middle of our belly. That's why we have this little hole in our belly. It's where the umbilical cord detached after we were born. But animals that hatch from eggs don't have a mom connected anymore. They've already left her. And that's where something kind of wild comes in. An egg is practically an animal's seed. Inside, it already contains all the nutrients the animal needs to form and eventually hatch. So a chicken or an alligator, while still inside the egg, feeds on the egg white and yolk, and they chemically transform that into their own bodies. They turn it into feathers, wings, beaks, internal organs, and so on. But I'll confess, when I researched this, I thought, wait a minute, these animals, they're not sitting there eating egg white and yolk like a little alligator or tiny chick would. If you crack open a raw egg, there's no tiny creature inside munching away. So how do those nutrients enter their bodies while they're still forming? They have an organ called the yolk sac, which is roughly equivalent to our umbilical cord. It draws in those nutrients and delivers them into the developing body. And in many animals, the yolk sac attaches more or less in the same spot where our umbilical cord connects, but it usually leaves little to no visible scar. So if you go looking for a navel on a chicken, you probably won't find one either. Why is the sun depicted as yellow if it's actually white? I have to admit, I looked this up and didn't find very satisfying answers, okay? So I'll offer a hypothesis, a possibility, a guessometer, based on what I think really happens. Right now, as I'm recording this video, it's 2 in the afternoon, right? So if I look up at the sky, the sun really is white. And if I wanted to draw today's sky, how would I draw a white sun on a white sheet of paper? I could color the sky blue and leave a white circle, but that wouldn't look very effective. So I'd have to use another color for the sun. And thinking about how I see the sun throughout the day, what's the next most common color I'd use after white? Yes, yellow. When the sun is setting, it turns quite yellow, and over time shifts toward red, becoming orange, and finally red as it sets. But depending on where you are, you might not see the horizon clearly, and you'd mostly just see that yellow hue. So yellow is sort of like the alternate jersey for the Brazilian national soccer team, a substitute color when you can't use the primary one. Can you cook a chicken using salt water from the sea? This idea is better than you might think. Okay. Back when we were doing our podcast, and by the way, we're going to bring the podcast back, all right? If you're watching this video and want us to interview someone on the podcast, please leave a suggestion in the comments. I really need your ideas. I'm getting older, and I mostly want to interview people from my generation. The ones I used to see on TV during my childhood. Anyway, I'd love to hear what you think. I don't want to talk to the same people who show up on every podcast these days. Come on, suggest someone cool who can actually teach us something worthwhile in the true Manual do Mundo spirit. If you're watching this video, it's probably because you love learning new things. I want to bring guests onto the podcast who can teach both you and me something new, got it? Anyway, one of the guests we had, who was amazing and taught us so much, was Amir Klink, the guy who rowed across the Atlantic Ocean in the 1980s. One thing I asked him was how he handled food on that journey. He spent 100 days rowing across the Atlantic. So how did he carry water for cooking? Look at what he replied.
That's when I came up with an idea nobody had tried before, a diet based entirely on dehydrated, rehydratable meals, using seawater.
So you were using the salt already in the seawater?
It's in excess.
Yeah.
When it boils.
And how did you solve that?
Well, not all foods work. For example, you can't make feijoada with seawater, it'd be way too salty. But you can rehydrate pre-cooked rice and vegetables and anything made from potatoes, gnocchi, mashed potatoes, and it was a really beautiful, successful project.
I didn't say the idea was good. It was so good that he actually did it. By the way, sometimes my autocorrect calls me Avid. Alternative names do pop up sometimes, right? Is it true that X-rays are called X? Because they didn't know what to name them at first. So what even is an X-ray? We've actually taken apart an X-ray machine here on Manual do Mundo. It's worth watching that video, but basically, it's a type of light humans can't see. And this light passes through the soft parts of our body, like skin and muscles, but can't go through hard parts, like bones or teeth. So when we take a photo using this light, we usually call that image a film. An X-ray, or a radiograph, you can see the shadow of all your bones, or any hard object inside you, like a watch, a bracelet, or anything like that. And that's how we can look inside the body and spot, for example, a fracture. The person who discovered X-rays was a German physicist named Wilhelm Conrad Röntgen. Do you say it like that? Let's check how it's pronounced in German. Come on, come on, come on. Röntgen. I never would have said Röntgen, but anyway, this guy discovered X-rays in 1895. Yes, he didn't have a name for that radiation he'd just discovered. So Wilhelm thought, duh.
If math uses X, when there's no known solution, why can't I do the same?
If you paid close attention, you realized he figured in mathematics uses X for the unknown. Why shouldn't I? So yes, the term X-ray comes from it being an unknown. Nobody knew exactly how it worked, and the image you're seeing now is the first radiograph in history. It's of Röntgen's wife's hand, and as you can see, she was wearing a ring. Protect your daughters. Kudos to you for that. What technical or college courses did you take? You know how, before that famous video by Felka about adultification. People used to ask me why I never showed Melissa and Helena in my videos. Well, after Felka's video, I don't need to explain it anymore because he made it crystal clear why showing kids in videos is problematic. So Felka, thank you. Not just for making such an important video that all of Brazil needed to see, but also because it saved me from having to explain this over and over again. To answer your second question, I studied technical data processing at ETech Fernando Prestes in Sorocaba. So I'm a certified data processing technician. That was during high school. And later I studied journalism at ECI USP. That's what I studied. A lot of people are surprised. They assume I studied chemistry, physics, or engineering. But most of my work here at Manual do Mundo is actually research. It's choosing video topics, presenting, editing, packaging, and figuring out the best way to publish the content. And all of that is communication work. Exactly what I studied in college. Fiber. Why? When a team wins a championship, do we say it won a title? The team gets a trophy, right? What does that have to do with a title? For your reference, in the dictionary I checked, the word title has 21 different meanings, but almost all relate to name. For example, a book has a title. It's the book's name. Title means a label, a tag, a name given to something. A noble title, for instance, is a word showing someone's nobility, like Viscount Ibertenario. Think about championships. Remember when Corinthians won the World Cup in 2012? No one was around to watch with me. I watched it with the doorman at my building. I still remember, it was awesome. The moment Corinthians beat Chelsea, they became the 2012 world champions. That's a title Corinthians holds, so they can be called Corinthians 2012 world champions. So, after any tournament a person or team wins, they can be called champion. They earn the title of champion. But this question sparked another. Why is it called a Copa Cup? The word Copa means cup or trophy. In fact, there was once a famous Brazilian song that went, "The World Cup is ours," and it's called Copa, because the prize given used to be shaped like a cup. Even though modern trophies don't really look like that anymore. In fact, we don't even call the World Cup trophy a trophy. We call it a taça. Cup, the Jules Rimet Cup, the World Cup trophy. And that leads to a third question. Why do trophies have this cup-like shape? That answer is a bit murkier. I researched this a lot and found two main theories. The first is that long ago, when someone won a championship, they'd get a cup so they could celebrate by drinking from it. The second is that in ancient Greece, one prize given to victors in competitions was an amphora, a jar filled with olive oil. So, trophies began to be shaped like containers that could hold olive oil. Regardless of the origin, the World Cup is called Copa because of its trophy's cup-like shape. I'm kind of out of the loop. But you never actually put the submarine in the ocean, did you? That would have been epic. Imagine if we could borrow a nice, fancy boat and go out to some spot in the middle of the sea, maybe somewhere beautiful like Parody, and actually launch the submarine into the water. Dive with it at least 3 times. Go down deep and see the ocean floor with plants, fish, and maybe even some divers around. It would have been truly amazing. What a shame it happened back in 2021. We've already tested that submarine in water long ago, and now we're building a mega sailboat that's definitely worth following. Channel member. You always get at least one guaranteed question here. How do banana plants grow if there are no banana seeds? That's a cruel question. Long ago, bananas did have seeds. It's hard to find now, but somewhere in the world, seeded bananas still exist. They're just extremely rare. In fact, it'd make a cool series showing you incredibly strange fruits we rarely see, like seeded bananas. But over time, we've modified bananas, right? We selectively bred bananas with fewer seeds that were sweeter, softer, and tastier. And eventually, the banana lost its seeds entirely. Now, it reproduces through shoots that the mother plant sends out. There's a part of the banana plant underground. It spreads horizontally beneath the soil, right? Sending out roots and shoots, gradually producing new banana plants farther and farther away. So if you want a banana plant cutting, you just slice off one of those shoots and plant it elsewhere. But when you do that, you're cloning the banana plant. You're making a genetic copy with identical DNA. It's great in one way. If you have a plant that produces sweet, delicious fruit, you can replicate those exact traits. But if a disease hits that banana variety, it'll attack all banana plants, putting the entire species at risk. And that's a problem we wouldn't have if bananas had more genetic diversity, if they weren't all identical clones. Because when a plague strikes, it might kill some plants, but others could survive and give rise to new, resistant generations. Anyway, bananas are delicious, but they face this real danger. But let's go back to that first question, why is it? But that question is kind of weird, isn't it? Why is it that our arm tingles? When I was 15, I once slept on my arm and woke up around 3 in the morning. When I got up, my arm was completely limp. I couldn't feel it at all. It was an extremely strange sensation. I grabbed my arm with my other hand, and it felt heavy, strange, even a little cold. That filled me with absolute panic. I went to wake up my mom, which was really embarrassing for me since I was already 15, because calling your mom when you're already becoming an adult feels awkward. I thought my arm had been paralyzed. This had never happened to me before. Maybe I'd cut a nerve or something. I'll never move my arm again, oh my god. And then, my mom told me my arm had fallen asleep, but way more intensely than I was used to. Of course, I'd definitely fallen asleep on my arm before. It wasn't the first time I'd lost sensation from lying on my arm, but I'd never lost feeling that completely. I couldn't even move it. She told me to start massaging my arm, which was hard because the arm wouldn't respond at all, to get blood flowing back into it. And slowly, I started regaining sensation and my arm tingled a lot. Really a lot. It hurt like crazy until it finally returned to normal. Maybe this has never happened to you so severely, but chances are one of your limbs has fallen asleep before. You felt that kind of numbness, kind of deadened. And when you try to wake up that limb, you feel this tingling like there are tons of little ants crawling all over it, a strange burning sensation that can be pretty uncomfortable. This actually happens for two different reasons. First, when you press really hard on your arm or leg, you cut off blood circulation. Blood can't reach your nerves, and those nerves are like wires connecting your limbs to your brain. Baldnessing. So to feel pain, move your limb, or perceive anything happening there, you need that connection. It's like an actual communication cable, a USB cord running inside your body. Without blood, it doesn't work properly. But there's a second factor. If you physically compress that nerve, if you squish that USB cable, it also stops functioning correctly. It can't communicate well with the brain anymore. When you sleep on your arm, you do both at once: cut off blood and compress the nerve, and communication goes haywire. When you move or wake up, blood returns and the pressure on the nerve is released. Then it starts communicating with the body again, but in a really scrambled way. And that's what causes the tingling, and why that sensation always follows when a limb gets compressed and falls asleep. It's also why you get that funny bone shock when you hit the inside of your elbow. Just tapping it here sends a little electric jolt down to my hand, a super quick micro tingle. That's because a nerve runs right here, very close to the skin, very exposed. And when you hit it, you scramble its communication with the brain. I hope you enjoyed this video. Remember, Manuel do Mundo has lots of cool stuff you can give as Christmas gifts, and we're building this beauty here to launch into the water, coming in our first video of the year. Deal.